back in the 1800s, when states were starting to farm, they didn't want to start with no law on the books. So what they did was say, well, all of the common law in England is going to be applicable to our state. And by English common law, what those states were saying are the development of law as judges developed those laws in England. A judge would get a case where someone left nails on the ground, someone else walked by, stepped on those nails, and the case, at the end of the case, you would find out a new judge-made law, which is don't put things on the ground that you know another might walk on. Don't do that. If you do that, you're going to be liable for the damages for the hurt foot from the other. Well, many cases evolved in that way in England. So you get this entire body of law that deal not only with putting things on the ground, but deal with making products that work, making products that won't damage someone, putting a civil penalty on hitting another person. All of those things formed over the years in England and were brought over with the new states here. Once they were here, they developed in the states as well. And again, every state except for Louisiana falls under this common law type of law. Over time, you get some of the tort law that goes from judges making the law to being brought into statutes, where the legislature, for instance, may say, well, our trespass laws are a bit, are bad public policy. As it stands, the way that the courts have developed trespass laws, property is completely off bounds to anyone. And I'm going to use in a situation in Oregon, for instance. Oregon is a gorgeous place. Nature, you know, going out and looking at the huge trees and climbing mountains and the like is very important there. So what they did was they took I wouldn't say completely ignored it, but they mostly ignored common law rules on trespass and put in some laws that said, you know what, if a property owner doesn't put up trespass signs, we are going to waive all liability against that property owner if someone goes on that property and gets injured. The reason we're going to do that is because we think that the lands around Oregon need to be explored, that people should feel free to go and wander about on someone else's property. We're not going to care so much. Of course, people could put no trespass signs and that would change things, but if you put those no trespass signs, then you may be liable for some of the damages. For instance, if you dug a huge hole and don't have any signs, when you know that someone crosses that, or people cross that area. That's a case where before the trespass laws were against the policy of having trespassers go on your property, to putting it into statute and making it okay for people to trespass on others' properties so long as certain things are met. The public policy changed from the common law to statutory law. And statutes always trump common law. So you have judge-made law, and that law can be trumped at any time by case law, or I'm sorry, by statutes. Versus civil law, where case law doesn't have as much weight. Instead, a code tries to do what case laws and statutes do in common law jurisdictions. A code is created at one time to try to make a policy decision at the beginning and then form an entire body of law around that policy decision. So it'll spell out a lot more than statutes and case law does in general. And in fact, the paper. In fact, if you look at Article 2315, you'll find where Louisiana defines a tort. You don't have to go look at a case, you just have to go look at a civil code article. So that's the big distinction, and just for you to understand case law a little bit better, it's good to know that when it comes to case law, you have two steps. Case law mainly arrives from the appeals court. At the trial court, that's where the case is put before a fact finder, a jury, or a judge. And a decision is made, a verdict is given. So you'll have someone who loses or someone who wins. Well, the loser will appeal the decision if they think it was a bad decision, made on bad law. Let's say that the judge said that trespass is the unlawful entering of another's property. And the loser, the person who trespassed, let's say, says, you know what? That's not good public policy. And I don't think the law of this state should support such a broad understanding of trespass. So they will appeal and say, you know what, I think trespass should better be defined as the unlawful entering of another's property with the intent to prevent the owner of that property from using his property. Well, the appeals court, depending on the state, it could be a few judges, could be a panel of judges, 3 or 4 judges, could be more than 3 or 4 judges. Well, the appeals court will write an opinion. The opinion will have a majority view and usually a minority view. The majority view is the majority of judges that are sitting to hear the case come together and say, this is what I think. I agree with you or I disagree with you. The minority is usually the one that they do some opposite view. Occasionally you'll have concurring opinions, which is an opinion that agrees with the majority. So let's say, for instance, this trespass loser appeals, and the majority says, you know what? You're right. You're right that you shouldn't have been found liable for the trespass because you did no harm. And that's why we're going to find in your favor.